My name is Father Benedict Caruso. I am 73 years old. For 31 of those years, I served as a Vatican-sanctioned exorcist, operating across southern Italy, Portugal, and twice in South America. I did not perform 12 rituals a year. In my peak years, I performed 40. I was not a parish priest dabbling in deliverance ministry. I was a specialist. I was on a list held in the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith in Rome, and when a bishop anywhere in my region encountered something his own priests could not manage, my name was the one he called. I want you to understand what that meant before I tell you what I am about to tell you. That kind of authority does not arrive without a cost. It requires you to become a man who is more loyal to the institution that granted it than to the God it claims to represent. It took me 3 decades and a woman named Lucia to understand that, and it cost Lucia everything. I am recording this because I am dying, not dramatically, not quickly. My heart is failing in the slow, bureaucratic way that old men's hearts fail. My doctor has given me somewhere between 1 and 3 years, and I have decided that I will not spend those years the way I spent the previous 30, in silence, in the particular silence of a man who knows exactly what he buried and exactly where he buried it, and has chosen every single morning to leave it there. If what I say tonight reaches even one family before they hand their suffering child to an institution that will use sacred language to cover institutional crime, then the years I wasted in that silence will have purchased something worth the price. Please, if you find value in what you are about to hear, subscribe to this channel and activate the notification bell, because these words belong to the people who were never allowed to speak them, and they deserve to travel as far as they can go. I was born in Palermo in 1951. My father was a fisherman. My mother cleaned the church of Santa Rosalia 3 mornings a week from the time I was born until the time I left for the seminary, and she did it for free because she believed that physical proximity to a holy place was itself a form of prayer. I grew up inside the smell of incense and old stone. I grew up believing that the men in robes were closer to God than the men in fishing boats, and I spent the first half of my life trying to become one of them, and the second half discovering what that belief had cost the people around me. I was ordained at 25. I was noticed early because I was serious in a way that made bishops comfortable. I did not drink. I did not ask difficult questions. I memorized things completely and recited them without error. When the Diocese of Palermo began looking for a young priest to train in the formal rite of exorcism, my superior recommended me without hesitation. He told me later that what he valued most was my obedience. That word again, obedience. The institutions that commit the worst acts always have the most beautiful words for the mechanism that makes those acts possible. I trained for 4 years under an older exorcist named Father Aldini, who had been doing this work since 1955. He was a small, precise man who kept meticulous records and smelled of camphor. He taught me the Latin of the rite until I could recite it sleeping. He taught me to distinguish what he called genuine manifestation from what he called psychological distress, presenting in a religious framework. He was careful. He was thorough. He genuinely believed he was helping people. What he did not teach me, because he did not know it himself, or perhaps because he knew it and had made his own peace with it, was what to do when the institution sent you to perform a ritual, not because a person needed spiritual help, but because the institution needed a problem to disappear. That lesson I learned on my own. In the winter of 1993, in a farmhouse outside a town called Caltanissetta, from a 22-year-old woman named Lucia Ferraro. The call came from a Monsignor in Rome, whose name I will not speak, not because I am protecting him. He died in 2011 with full honors and a funeral attended by 2 cardinals, but because naming him would allow the story to become about one man when it is about a system. He told me there was a young woman who had become severely unstable following a period of association with a priest in her parish. He used that phrase, a period of association. He said she was exhibiting behavior that her family found disturbing. She was not eating. She was speaking about things that had happened to her in ways that were causing significant distress to those around her. He said her parish priest believed there might be a spiritual dimension to her suffering and had requested a formal assessment. I drove to Caltanissetta on a Tuesday morning in February. The sky was the color of dirty chalk. The farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel road flanked by dead almond trees, and when I knocked, the door was opened by Lucia's mother, a stout woman with eyes that had the particular exhaustion of someone who has been frightened for a very long time and has stopped expecting the fear to end. Lucia was in the kitchen. She was thin in a way that looked recent, as though weight had left her quickly rather than gradually. She sat with her hands folded on the table in front of her, and she looked at me the way people look at you when they have said something true many times and have stopped expecting to be believed. I asked her the standard assessment questions. Had she experienced unusual spiritual disturbances? She said she did not know how to answer that. Had she felt a presence she could not explain? She looked at her hands. Had she engaged in any practices contrary to the faith? She said quietly, no. Then she said something that I wrote down in my notes that evening and have not been able to forget since. She said, Father, the thing that is hurting me does not come from below. It comes from inside the church. I asked her what she meant. Her mother, who had been standing in the doorway, left the room. Lucia was quiet for a long moment. Then she told me. She told me slowly, with the specific precision of someone who has organized a truth very carefully, because they have learned that no one will believe them if they tell it in pieces. She told me that for 14 months a priest in her parish, a man trusted with the youth ministry, had subjected her to sustained abuse beginning when she was 20 years old. She had told her mother, and her mother had gone to the parish. The parish had gone to the diocese. The diocese had called Rome, and Rome had sent me. I sat in that kitchen in Caltanissetta, and I understood in a way that arrived not as a thought, but as a physical sensation, like cold water poured down the back of the neck, exactly why I was there. I was not there to heal Lucia. I was there to reclassify her. A woman with a credible accusation is a crisis. A woman with a demonic affliction is a pastoral matter. The ritual I had been trained to perform was not, in this case, a form of care. It was a form of erasure. I want to tell you that I refused. I want to tell you that I stood up from that kitchen table, took Lucia by the hand, drove her to the nearest civil authority, and told them everything she had told me. I did not do that. I did what I had been trained to do. I did what the institution required. I performed the assessment. I filed a report through ecclesiastical channels describing Lucia as exhibiting signs of severe psychological disturbance with possible spiritual dimension. I recommended further pastoral support. I drove back to Palermo. I ate dinner. I said compline. I slept. If there are people watching this, who have family inside any institution that uses sacred authority to manage its own accountability, please hear me now, because what I am about to say is the truest thing I know. The most dangerous moment in institutional evil is not when a wicked man makes a wicked decision. It is when a man who is not wicked makes a decision he knows is wrong and finds the next morning that he is still himself, that the sun has still risen, that God has apparently not struck him down, that life has continued with complete indifference to what he has done. That normality is the most powerful drug an institution can offer, and it is offered freely every single morning to every man willing to pay the price of someone else's suffering for it. Subscribe to this channel and ring the notification bell, because testimony like this one is the only counterweight to that normality, and it needs to reach every person it can reach before another Lucia pays the price. Lucia was hospitalized twice in the following year. The priest was moved to a parish in the north. I received a formal letter of commendation from the Monsignor who had sent me, thanking me for my discretion and my service to the church. I put the letter in a file. I continued performing exorcisms. I continued being a name on a list in the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. I continued being a man of exceptional spiritual authority. In 2004, I was at a conference in Rome when a colleague who worked in the north of Italy mentioned in passing that a young woman in a case he had been asked to consult on had died the previous spring. He mentioned her name because he had recently come across his old notes. The name was Lucia Ferraro. She had been 33 years old. She had spent the last years of her life cycling through 3 different psychiatric facilities. She had, according to what my colleague had heard through the diocesan network, never stopped insisting that what had happened to her was real, and no one had ever confirmed that it was. I left the conference early. I told my colleague I had a headache. So I went back to my room at the residence, and I sat on the edge of the bed for a very long time without moving. I thought about her sitting at that kitchen table with her hands folded, with that particular look of a person who has rehearsed a truth so many times it has worn grooves into them. I thought about her saying, "The thing that is hurting me does not come from below." I thought about the letter of commendation in my file. I did not weep. I want to be honest about that. I did not weep. I sat there in the quiet, and I felt something that I can only describe as the structure of my faith developing a crack that would take another 15 years to split all the way through. The split came in 2019. I was in hospital for my heart, the first serious episode, and in the bed next to mine there was an old man dying of something in his lungs. And in the last night before he was moved to another ward, he was delirious, and he kept calling out a name, a woman's name, in a voice so stripped of everything except want that it sounded less like a voice and more like a wound making sound. And I lay there in the dark listening to him, and I thought, I know whose name I would call. And the name was not a saint. It was not the Virgin. It was not any name the Church had ever given me to call upon. It was Lucia. It was an apology that had nowhere to go. I left formal ministry in 2021. Not with drama, not with a public denunciation. I simply stopped. I told my bishop I was retiring due to my health, which was true, and also told him that I could no longer in good conscience perform any function that required me to act as an instrument of institutional authority, which he received in silence and did not ask me to explain. In the 2 years since, I have done what Jim once described, though I did not know his words then. I have sat with the Gospels alone, not the Gospels as administered by the Church, the Gospels as written. I have read the scene where Jesus encounters the woman that the institution has marked as unclean and simply says, "Neither do I condemn you." I have read it many times. I have thought about Lucia every time. I have thought about the particular brutality of an institution that takes the name of that Jesus and uses it to tell a suffering woman that her suffering is supernatural in origin and therefore beyond the reach of justice. The God I believed I was serving for 31 years would have walked into that farmhouse in Caltanissetta and done the one thing I did not do. He would have believed her. He would have said, "I believe you." And those 3 words, spoken by a man with the authority I held, might have changed everything. I did not say them. I am saying them now, 12 years too late, to a woman who cannot hear them. Lucia Ferraro was telling the truth. What was done to her was real. What was done to her afterward, the reclassification, the hospitalization, the silence, was not pastoral care. It was institutional self-preservation carried out with holy water and Latin, and the full weight of 2,000 years of sacred authority. And I was the instrument of it. If you have stayed with me this long, I am grateful for your witness. And I ask one small thing in return. If these words found you, please make sure they find someone else. Subscribe to this channel and activate the notification bell, as so that when the next person speaks, when the next man or woman who spent their life inside one of these institutions finally decides that the truth is worth more than the silence, their words will reach you. Because the only thing that changes institutions is the accumulation of testimony they cannot ignore. And every name spoken out loud, Lucia, Ashley, Rebecca, every name that was buried in a file or a binder or a letter of commendation deserves to be heard by as many people as are willing to listen. I am an old man with a failing heart and a debt I do not know how to repay except with this, with truth, with her name, with the willingness to finally say out loud in front of anyone who will hear it, "She was right, and I was wrong, and I am sorry, and it is not enough, but it is what I have."